Adam, it is so great to get to interview you and get to see a little peek behind the curtain of what's going on at Pitch. So thank you so much for making some time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to nerd out about product and technology.
Man, me too. I have to start with Wunderlist because I was a longtime Wunderlist fanboy back in the day. This was back in, I guess, early 2000 teens. And it was fantastic. I was there for the desktop app, the move into mobile. It was one of the first apps I downloaded on my first iPhone ever. So thank you very much for building such a beautiful piece of software. And for anyone who doesn't know, Wunderlist was bought by Microsoft in 2015. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Or right around there? Yeah.
Yeah.
So starting off with a little bit of a hardball question. What were you feeling when Microsoft tasked you with building their Wunderlist competitor, Microsoft To Do?
Wow, yeah, that's an interesting question. So we had already worked for a while on integrating Wunderlist with the Microsoft ecosystem, putting Cortana in there, or integrating it with the Microsoft project or things like that. But at some point there was a new management in place, and someone had the idea of trying to solve one of the fundamental problems that we always saw for productivity software, for a to-do list, which is you fill your to-do list, you blame the software for not getting things done, and you move on to the next thing. The idea for Microsoft To Do was very different, to come up with a way that you could recommit to everything every day. So it was actually quite an exciting idea to build something new. It was sad to leave the old behind, and I wouldn't have made the same choice about leaving the brand necessarily and the design style, but it was quite an exciting project. And I worked leading cross-functional teams working on the actual algorithm to suggest things. So that was a really interesting experience, trying to build something at the same time for every platform, and just how do you test that? How do you get the right quality everywhere? So yeah, I don't use it myself anymore. I don't work on it, but yeah.
Out of my own curiosity, have you managed to find a personal task management tool to replace Wunderlist in the recent years? And if so, what is that tool for you?
Yeah, so I'm mostly using for my personal life something called Superlist, which is the spiritual successor of Wunderlist, which is something that Christian, my co-founder and the founder of Wunderlist, he started together with a few of the old people from Wunderlist and a few people we met in different places, Metal Lab. So it kind of takes on a Notion-esque approach to tasks, more document focused. So we use that here at home for planning our renovations or shopping lists or things like that.
All right. So coming out of Wunderlist and out of Microsoft and toward Pitch, what were some of the important lessons that you and the rest of the founding team brought from your time at Wunderlist that shaped or colored the way that you thought about building Pitch from the ground up?
Yeah, so one thing that we experienced, all of us at Microsoft, was that it was very slow to affect change. There was lots of bureaucracy, hierarchy. They have this magical role of a program manager who is kind of guiding everything. So it felt like it was just hard to get anything interesting done. So what we wanted to do with Pitch was to not focus so much, in the beginning at least, on product management, more on very product focused engineers and designers, and try to build a product that we were really excited about, and not get stuck in the beginning of listening too much to our potential users, but really explore. And that led us to a pivot that changed our minds quite a lot in the beginning, but we did that standing on a foundation of actual knowledge and experience then, and not just, theory.
I have three questions kind of coming out of everything you just said, because that was such a good answer and it was packed full of stuff. First thing is, you mentioned you tried not to listen to users too much in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I assume this comes from a similar place as Henry Ford's classic, if we asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse type of a concept. Is that correct? Or is there something more behind that?
That, as well as, like, if you're going to work on something day in and day out, it has to be something that is exciting and is delightful. And I think it's very hard to build something completely for other people. It's very hard to make decisions about things, especially in the early days. But yeah, it's also true. People
So
tend to jump to known solutions very quickly.
sure, sure. Speaking of hard decisions, what were some of the decisions early on that maybe were cause of some of that debate or struggle amongst the co-founders of Pitch? And maybe how did y'all think through landing on a certain decision?
Yeah, I'd say like the biggest thing that we debated back and forth and actually changed our mind about was fundamentally how the canvas works, how the creative surface works. And our first version was a lot more like what you would say, like Notion, block
Sure.
based, much more rigid. But as we used our own product to build presentations, and then when we invited our first very early alpha users, we might call them guinea pigs, we saw that there was not enough ability to express whatever you want to be creative on the canvas. So we went from that kind of rigid canvas to a very free form, more like a drawing tool. And yeah, and that was much easier transition for other people coming from legacy presentation software. And since then, we're gradually introducing these more magical interactions on the canvas that feels like a block-based editor rather than just a single sheet of paper.
I want to go back to something you said a minute ago about not wanting to fit too heavily into the PM role, the product management role. Can you talk to me about how product development works at Pitch early on and how it's evolved to today? I was actually just talking with Nan, who is the head of product at Linear, and they have a similar style where the engineers are actually a big part of that scoping process, where the product manager isn't really involved. They don't really have product managers. It's kind of engineer based. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how Pitch started out and then maybe how y'all run product development today.
Yeah, sure. So when we started out, we had this idea of building a team of people who are writing code and designing screens very, very closely in tune to what we want. And we're 8 co-founders. That's quite a large group. And then our early hires, we were maybe like 10, 12 people in the first few months. So we were in one room screaming at each other if we needed to. It was very easy to resolve any kind of discussion. That becomes harder, of course, as you grow. And we've gone on a trajectory of being very disorganized, it's the wrong word, but free form, into having more structure and more process, of course. And today, like many companies, we have product design and engineering as 3 equal legs. But the role of thinking about product and evolving the product and scoping and shaping and everything it's a discipline that the product managers are experts at, but something that everyone can take part of. So it's a very collaborative setting of figuring out, mapping the user problems to potential solutions and validating them. So if you talk with a pitch engineer, they would not just talk about code, but also how do we measure that something is impactful? How do we know that we've done something worth keeping in the app?
And on that note, how do you know? What are some of the methods for feedback or tracking interactions that allow you to extract useful data from it and allow you to say, this is a feature worth keeping or not?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of multiple things. Like, of course, we can use data as in, quantitative research and see metrics and dashboards and everything to see that people are actually finding what we've built and they're using it and it's helping them to solve the specific problems we were thinking about. But I think even more interesting that is the user interviews. So we have a great user research team, and same as with the product managers, they are the experts on that discipline, but they bring engineers and designers along. So when we build something, we usually try to build very small iterations at first, building prototypes. We're testing the screens internally a lot first, and then also with users. So I think really the most impactful way of figuring out if what you did was good enough is hearing it from users who were part of that initial problem statement. So like going from building for yourself, someone you know really well, to someone else, but you need to get to know them quite well, what their actual struggles are, and not just, back to the Henry Ford quote, not just what they imagine would solve it right away.
Speaking of getting to know your users and what they want, a couple of months ago, you tweeted about the brand new text editor that you introduced. And it was a really interesting tweet because you said it allowed you to squash 50 long-standing bugs and remove 4 years of accumulated tech debt, which is a huge advancement in the product. Very awesome. But I'm so curious about the balance that you strike between fixing bugs in the short term that may provide, a poor user experience versus saying, look, we're working on something that's going to eliminate all of these bugs, but you just need to give us a little more time. Please hang in there and be patient with us. What was that balance like? Was there an internal struggle amongst the team to push toward fixing bugs versus working on this new text editor? And yeah, what was that decision-making process like?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think I don't have a perfect answer for how to handle that. I think it comes down to like continually trying to find that balance and realizing that you're never going to get it right. It's always a bit of a back and forth. I think what we've done at Pitch is try to also identify what parts of our product are really core to the everyday use case. So like switching slides or editing text should not fundamentally break. Then we have to ring the alarm bell and fix it immediately. But these bugs on the text editor, more like awkward ones, like you unbold a selection and suddenly something else changes. And it all came down to a very early decision of using a specific library and then kind of being too entrenched in that we had a hard time getting out of it because we built so much on top of this fundamental text block. So it was really relieving to finally get that done. And I was working quite actively with that team on actually implementing that. And text editing is hard. I would say that it's nice if we can build something that feels simple on the surface and hides away all that complex machinery to make it feel right.
Well, I'm gonna back up a little bit because I want to go back to the founding moments of Pitch. PowerPoint is probably the most ubiquitous presentation software on the planet, and you worked for the company that built that. So coming out of Microsoft and starting Pitch from scratch, what was the feeling amongst the team as you landed on, we want to build presentation software? Was there a degree of confidence because you knew how the sausage was made in Microsoft and you said we can beat that? Or was there a little bit of fear knowing that Microsoft had immense resources and ubiquity through their Windows platform?
Not fear. I would say once we landed on the opportunity of addressing the presentation software and modernizing that, our brains started running at full speed and like imagining everything that we could do. And we did a whiteboard session on one of our first days in our first new office, filling a whiteboard with lots of things we would do. Of course, it's an interesting challenge to have a behemoth like that as the incumbent, but yeah, I think that's nothing to worry about. I think Microsoft has showed in later years that they're very good at quickly copying other things that were successful without adding any original thought to it. They could do that with Pitch or any product. We just have to be better at having great design, better templates, and the original thoughts, the original ideas we put into it. Yeah, try to stay ahead of the curve and have our own character, I think.
Absolutely. Have you ever read the article, Google Slides is actually hilarious?
No, I'm not sure. It sounds vaguely familiar.
I'm going to have to send it to you afterwards. It was going around the Twitter sphere a few months ago, and it was a great look at all of the user experience oddities of Google Slides. And as a heavy Google Slide user prior to finding Pitch, and for me, it reiterated the absolute necessity for something like Pitch to come along and, I hate using this word, but disrupt the way that presentations work. When you were dreaming up Pitch for the first time, what were some of the insights or the new technologies that were driving that vision forward? What was it that you just latched onto and couldn't let go of and said, we have to build this because if we get this thing right, it will change the game for presentations?
Yeah, so I think that one of the earliest things we were thinking about is how do we actually build it? Where do we put it? We're coming out of this era of desktop software still, and we started talking about building something that is part of the fabric of the web, that's built of the material of the internet and can be embedded or can embed things and can naturally fit together with everything else that's out there on the internet, that is a capability that we can leverage that is hard for desktop software to do. I think another thing was we use a programming language called Clojure, which I'm very passionate about. I found it while working at Microsoft as a kind of escape from the day-to-day frustration. And we decided to use that because it gave us a really fast workflow of building UI. And this was before some of the React technology had kind of caught up with where Clojure and ClojureScript was at. And it was also a language that has both a backend and a front-end version. So we don't have to think about backend and front-end engineers. We are just product creators or product developers. So I think that really helped us in the beginning to think holistically about our product. I think you've mentioned this Google Slides article. I mean, that is really kind of an artifact of having many different teams disconnected, working on a single slice, trying to optimize that towards a specific metric, and not thinking about a holistic product or building something that can give the user an arc of compounding capabilities.
Speaking of which, what are some of those compounding capabilities that were empowered by building natively for the web? Because coming from PowerPoint, it was a desktop-based software. There were some inherent limitations to what users could do. But with the introduction of companies like Pitch, like Figma, we have these web native applications that allow us to do a lot of really cool things. What were some of those that for Pitch was letting you stand out and stand apart from the competition?
One of the things that we were trying to solve for is this problem of having a file that you have to distribute, and it ends up appending more version markers or
final.
Yeah,
this is the most final.
Final V2.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So just the simple idea of putting your work in the cloud so everyone is seeing the same thing. In the beginning, I think I talked a lot with the team about building a wormhole. So it really feels like you're working on the same universal computer, back to mainframe days almost. So everyone sees the same thing. And that in turn informed or helped us understand how we would look at collaboration as something that is really immediate, not passing work back and forth, but rather being in the same room. And I mean, this was pre-COVID, before the whole world went remote. We were already hybrid from the beginning. I think we saw that this kind of work, trying to overcome that we're sitting in different places and make work feel direct and meaningful in a different way than just passing notes back and forth. Yeah, there was an important realization that we felt we had to act on.
I agree, and that was one of the big things that drew me to Pitch whenever I first got beta access back in the day, was that real-time collaboration. So very, very cool. Another thing that I think is really interesting is your move toward presentation analytics. This is one of those things that is birthed out of having that link instead of a file, right? Is you can build in things like analytics and track interactions with a particular presentation. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And then maybe segue into what will eventually be interactive presentations.
Before Pitch, let's say, you had tools to generate PDFs for the most part. You generate this dead document, you send it to someone over email, and maybe you get some feedback. But it's hard to know if someone is even getting past your first 3 slides. So we felt that this was a very natural thing to put in to understand, is someone even reading what I'm writing? The way that we look at how we develop our product, but also how the product should work for our users, we want to reduce feedback loops as much as possible to make everything more direct. So our analytics is today not real time. It's aggregated and slightly time delayed, but you get a very fast feel for if you send your link out even to your coworkers to see, are people picking it up? You can also understand that if we have an internal data now that we have slide level analytics, we can see how much time in an anonymous way people spend on each slide. So you can figure out also, is the message on this slide landing? If it's a text heavy slide that people skip over, yeah, it's not working. And I think we will also be able to build more tools on top of that to kind of help people craft their story, refine it, remove things that is not necessarily helpful to reach the outcome that you want. Going beyond that, part of why we want to get out of the PDFs is that for many people, it feels like a chore getting a presentation. Someone has spent a lot of time working on crafting a message for you to receive, but it feels like really work to read through it and not exciting. And it's a very passive experience for the most part, except for clicking the arrow button. So we want to make it much more fun and interactive and joyful on both sides, on the creator side, but also on the consumer side, because every presentation is made to be shared with at least one person, and usually many, many more. And if you can give them some more incentive to go to the end of presentation or to interact with it along the way, we can have them engage much more. They will have a more positive feeling about the presentation, but also build tools that allow us to make maybe shorter presentations where information can be hidden or revealed, or presentations that are split between the take-home version and the present in front of stage version. So there's lots of ideas that we will explore there to really leverage the power of the web, of the ability to just type in a short URL and then you and me are in the same room and we can talk, basically.
I don't know if you've gotten a chance to play with the browser company's new Arc browser. They have these live screenshots that you can take, in the sense that if it's screenshotting a chart or something, those charts will be updated in real time. Is there something similar in the sense of interactive presentations having this connectivity to other parts of the web through integrations, specific integrations with tools, or even potentially through something like a live screenshot that would allow presentations to become less about a static and more so be this long-term dashboard of a sense where you keep coming back to this presentation because it's kind of aggregating different parts of the web and bringing it together in one place for you?
Yeah, so we've explored this idea a little bit, and we will probably look at it more in the future. So we have a few data integrations where you can authenticate your provider, and then you can pull the data and refresh the data all the time. So you can get away from screenshotting charts. Our idea with that was also that it means that not everyone has to be logged into every tool to be able to update all the data. There's another interesting perspective of it, which is presentations themselves. They can be both a consumer of data, a consumer of an API, but it can kind of be an API itself. They are filled with information. So I think in the future, we will look a lot at leveraging the information that's in there and connecting even more things from the outside so that you can generate decks from an API using our templates, or just very quickly updating a lot of things in your decks. Like, a salesperson has a deck, and then you just need to fill out a few fields of the name and the person you're talking to, and suddenly you have a ready sales deck that is customized for a client, and you didn't have to go through each slide to customize it. So we think that way we can allow people to create at the speed of thought rather than have to think about what the hand should do with the mouse to drag around a box. I think there's a lot to explore there.
I want to pivot now to some of the frameworks and practices of the product development culture at Pitch. What are some of the mantras or values that help recenter your team whenever you're thinking of new features, whenever you're consuming user feedback and trying to filter through it? what are some of those things that just provide structure for the teams at Pitch when you're developing product?
Yeah, so I think what I mentioned in the beginning, that we're still building a product for ourselves. We are heavy users of presentations, maybe not so surprising. We use it also in quite novel ways to really test the boundaries. So we kind of look at solutions and see how well do they solve an individual user problem, but how broadly applicable are they also to all problems and for ourselves, for all the problems we've created for ourselves.
I'm really interested in the vision for Pitch, and this is something that I think is particularly potent to me as a founder myself, because I know that the conversations amongst founders that happen behind closed doors are always so much more ambitious and wide casting than what is typically shared with the public or even with the team sometimes. Would you be willing to share some of the biggest ambitions of what you envision Pitch to be, and in the wildest way, what were some of the things on that whiteboard early on that you and the co-founders were dreaming about, you considered taking on presentations as an industry?
Yeah, I think it's actually not a secret at all, because we talk about it a lot, but I think that the format of presentations is a kind of a universal storytelling format. It's pages of text and images and some doodles or shapes to illustrate your point. It's a sheet of paper that you can draw on. And a very early idea was, what if we can put a computer on your sheet of paper? Like, we can make it really, really interactive. The thing is, it takes a lot of effort to build all of that. So I think a more interesting idea and something that we will work towards or are working towards, but it will take us a long time, is making it so that users can express anything in Pitch. There are no blockers on their creativity, and that we really take it to the next level from the old era of cellophane sheets and an overhead projector to something that feels truly digital. And I think with that, you can think less about presentations or decks and more about stories, which are told in a linear or non-linear way. Over time, I would like for our users to be able to customize this much more to express anything. But I don't want them to have to learn how to write code with text. That takes a long time to master. I think nowadays there's lots of interesting research and new ideas of how to bridge the gap between professional programming and what we could call end user programming. I think there's a lot exciting to explore there. We'll see how that turns out in the future.
We're going to wrap up on this final question, which is, what is the weirdest thing that you've ever used a presentation deck for?
Weirdest thing. So I use it for programming, for trying to decipher data structures, and could put the data structure as text there, and then I can draw lines. And I found that since I started working on Pitch, I use much more visual artifacts in programming, or trying to understand different parts of the code. It's usually never for someone else to see. It's a tool for thought in that sense. Otherwise, we use presentation for almost anything. Someone has a birthday, we make a deck. Someone is leaving the team or joining the team, we make a deck. One of the rituals that are really stuck with us is that every week we make a deck of our accomplishment. We did this since almost the first beta, the first version was running, and we could store presentations in the cloud. And this is really stuck with us as a way of both making sure that everyone in the company uses our product at least once a week, even if they didn't have to make a deck, but also just to continuously take pride in what we do, even though if it's not ready for users yet. Some things take a long time to get out, and the feedback is delayed, but to have that internal feedback and constantly be proud of what you're doing, or also course correct if you do go the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Adam, this was an awesome conversation. It was so cool to see behind the scenes of the story into Pitch from Wunderlist, to see how y'all work present day, and then some of that vision into the future. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation.